Today we're going to be talking about a subject that's near and dear to me, and that's looking at pop culture icons, specifically heroes who are also arrogant bastards. My name is Robert Jones, and you're watching The Story Detective. All of my recent subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button below. Also, if you have videos or opinions on heroes who are also arrogant bastards, feel free to leave your comments or even links to your videos below. First up is Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, aka a definitive arrogant bastard. And we're going to be giving away some spoilers for Avengers Endgame. If you haven't seen it, you may want to fast forward past this part. What can we say about Tony Stark? Looking at the MCU, the films, are they consistent with the comic books? Pretty much they are. No matter how you slice it, Iron Man has always had a hefty degree of arrogance. The downside of that arrogance is he's so high on himself that once he gets low, he's pretty much manic. I mean, he falls pretty flat to the degree in the comic books that he had an alcohol issue. In the Avengers, we see this. When he falls, he's ready to do something drastic. He's having a pity party, that moment where Stark removes the arc reactor from his chest. Now, granted, a lot of people are dead. He'd be down. Anybody would be. But he's the only one that's willing to kill himself over this. If you think about it, it's sociopathic behavior because it's still about him. He's still saying, look at me, just let me die. You know, my life doesn't matter anymore because I failed. I had this ultimate challenge and now I'm ultimately hitting bottom and there's nothing left for me. Just make sure that a lot of press shows up and maybe have a parade. An arrogant bastard and a sociopath. Yes, but as Sherlock Holmes might say, he's a highly functional sociopath. And that all plays into how the movie ended. Was it true to his character? I think it was, at least for the movies. It began with Iron Man, and I think it had to end with Iron Man. With all the ups and downs and the arrogance, you could also see the collision with Captain America. Whenever things started to crack and it wasn't his plan, then he had a problem with it. You can also look at the arrogance as Tony Stark getting on stage in front of the world and saying, I'm Iron Man, I just saved your asses. Because this is the epitome, I think, of his arrogance. Because he's designed the suit, he's designed his own tech. Nobody's going to come for him because he probably has an Iron Man suit up his butt, and as soon as somebody tries to get at him, it's going to pop out and he's going to be Iron Man and he's going to take him down. At least this is what he believes. And the smartest of characters out there, they're not as smart as he is. They're not as well equipped. He can handle anything. In the comic books, he was called the Invincible Iron Man. And I think that title fit because he honestly believes that on many levels. Now, when he has his manic side, instead of the on the stage, center stage, his manic side is willing to die. If you've seen Avengers Endgame, you know that he dies in the end. This is pretty true for the character. When your hero goes into that endgame, they're going in with live free or die. They have to be that involved in the plot. They have to be that involved with themselves on some level, because when they go in there, win or lose, they're going to either become the martyr or they're going to become the victor. Either way, they're center stage, and for Tony Stark, this totally suits his character. So in the end, when he decides to again work in that little trick with the gauntlet that he designed, and remember, that's his tech again, the failsafe in there to take those Infinity Stones and use them for himself. You think about it. He's working with Thor, all of these ultimately powerful cosmic super beings and gods, and yet the failsafe is there because he doesn't completely trust anybody aside from himself. He's like, okay, you know, we'll give these guys a chance, but if they don't succeed, I'm going to be the one. And maybe that parade will happen after all. And if he doesn't like whoever is in charge, he does get the ultimate decision. Whether it's Thanos, his teammates, he's still the sociopath, and he's still the arrogant bastard, no matter which way you slice it. And yes, I understand that the story, again, it began with Iron Man and needs to end with Iron Man. His heroics, do they stem from pure altruism, or do they extend from something else? I believe there's another factor to that. He would not have sacrificed himself if he didn't have the daughter. That future where he had somebody that he loved more than himself. If it wasn't for having a daughter, would he have done it? Think about it. Whether you're a person who has goodwill for the world, or whether you're arrogant yourself. Say some government special ops time travel person comes up to you and says, the world is going to end, but specifically we've traced an event to you. You have to do this, this, and this, and you're going to die, but you'll save the whole world. Are you going to say, fine, kill me? Or are you going to ask for something in return, or have to think about it a lot? Unless you have someone or something that you love more than yourself, that you're going to actually benefit by your sacrifice, that sacrifice of the personal probably isn't going to happen. So was this a true redeeming factor for Tony Stark, as well as being true to his character? I think it did both. So ultimately, there was no parade. He ended up having his gathering of friends at his home, but, you know, I'm sure there's a monument being erected somewhere. Next up, one of my favorite characters of all time, Sherlock Holmes. You can trace him all the way back to the end of the Victorian era, no matter where you come at the character, whether it's the modern version or the classic version, he's the definitive arrogant bastard. As a character analysis, what does Sherlock Holmes have in common with Tony Stark? Well, first of all, he's manic himself. When he's working a job, when his mind is operating on the clues that he believes he was born to put together and solve, he's way up here in his arrogance, and his ego takes him to some very high places. When he has no case, he also falls flat. He falls flat to the point of making himself ill. And when he's not physically ill, he's making himself ill by taking cocaine, a 7% solution. Now, his addictive behavior is supposedly because when he's stagnant, he can't really operate on those same mental highs. So he needs an artificial high to make himself feel like he's a genius, even when he's not being a genius. So again, this is the epitome of an arrogant bastard. When he's not center stage, he's making it feel like he's there anyway, even if it's a drug trip. There's an imbalance in the flaw of Sherlock Holmes that he's trying to rectify. What that is has been a mystery for over 100 years. The one thing about the past version of Holmes and the current version, as much as I like the Benedict Cumberbatch version of Sherlock, he's only great because the writers understood the character. And those early seasons they took directly from the stories and tried to puzzle out a modern day equivalent. They put a lot of thought into figuring out those modern day equivalents, and that's why it worked. In some of the current seasons, the problems that people have with it is because they're getting away from that. For the other version of Sherlock, the other modern version, is what killed that show for me. I'm watching it, and a few episodes in, he's contradicting himself, and he's contradicting his own genius and his arrogance. At one point, he said to the Watson, the Lucy Liu character, "Not everything is deducible." Now, Sherlock in his arrogance would never admit that he couldn't figure out a problem. He may say that he needs the facts to figure it out. He needs the clay to make bricks, but he would never admit failure on that level or that he's somehow imperfect, because that would take him off his pedestal. And from that point, he was no longer Sherlock Holmes. He was Sherlock in name only. And I think that show would have been better off if they took it to the degree that here's this guy who believes he's Sherlock Holmes. Maybe he has some psychological complex and he's trying to relate to that character for some reason, then it would have suddenly been believable. But when you're saying it's Sherlock and you're going against the grain and you obviously don't understand the character, you've undercut everything that you're working for. In the original Sherlock Holmes canon, we had Sherlock going much the same way that Tony Stark did in Avengers Endgame. He met a villain who was his intellectual equal, and when he could not overcome it for the greater good, he put himself out there and said, okay, if it's my life or his life, if I can make a difference, I'll gladly take that sacrifice, because this is the epitome of everything that Holmes worked for. And putting himself on the line to live or die and very willing to martyr himself was the same character. Interestingly enough, Robert Downey Jr. played both Tony Stark and Sherlock Holmes, so he's very good at playing those type of characters. There are the arrogant bastards, so in reality that's been his prize role throughout his career. So could he potentially be an arrogant bastard himself? I don't know the man, I'm just saying. And going back over 100 years, we see that those character flaws were very realistic, and the standards held for today. That's why they seem like very modern stories, and that's why they outlived their author. Interesting sidebar to the death of Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle creates this amazing character that's taken on a life of his own. He's taken on such a reality in people's heads that they believe Sherlock Holmes is a real person. Some people still do to this day. But back in the 1800s, people are writing letters to Conan Doyle's publishing company. They're forwarding the letters to Conan Doyle. They're inquiring about Holmes. They're asking about problems, if he's available to solve their case. And Arthur Conan Doyle is sitting back and saying, oh my God, I'm being upstaged by my own character because everybody is looking at him and they're not looking at me. Maybe he's an arrogant ass himself, but he decides that nobody should like this cold-blooded, calculating character. I don't like him. You shouldn't like him. Nobody likes him. So there's a moment in there. It's like Clash of the Titans, where Zeus is on Mount Olympus and he sees his creation down below, and his creation is doing things he doesn't like. So so let's call out the Kraken. Zeus Doyle says, we have to get rid of this bloody arse because, you know, my other novels, historical novels, are not selling because of Sherlock Holmes. Everybody wants that. So I've got an idea. Let's kill him. So the man who created Sherlock Holmes, who plotted all of these brilliant murder mysteries, is now plotting to kill his own creation. And he does so kind of brilliantly with Moriarty, but he totally wants to get him out of the way, so he kills him off. Fast forward to 3 years later. People still have an outcry for Sherlock Holmes. His publisher is saying, write more Holmes stories. Conan Doyle's own mother is saying you should go back and write more Sherlock Holmes. So Conan Doyle throws his hands up and says, I know which side of the bread my butter is on, whatever that statement is supposed to mean. But he realizes that his larger-than-life character, his cash cow, he totally obliterated. And if his other books aren't selling, so let's go back and resurrect Holmes. So then he throws the monkey wrench into this story that had a finite ending. Let's bring him back and let's not care as much about the character. So we're just coasting with Holmes from that point. There's almost an ending, and then there's an anti-climax because it wasn't really a definitive ending. So if you look at a character within the context of their story, their arc, their novel, they have to overcome those inner demons in order to defeat whatever their greatest villain is, the big conflict in their life, their story. So by bringing back Holmes, they kind of negated that. Let's look at Batman, the Dark Knight himself. We understand that his parents was murdered and that was the thing that made him evolve into this. But how long has this been? How many criminals has he put away? Now it's like, my parents are murdered and I have to be this. This is the crutch upon which he stands, that everything that he's built, the structure of his entire existence, is leaning on that crutch. And he makes no bones about it. He will say, yes, I am arrogant. Yes, we are all criminals as heroes because we're going out of our way to rise above the law. We're putting on masks and we are basically going out there and being vigilantes. And he'll say this to Superman, and Superman will stand back there and say, "Oh no, that's you, buddy, but it's not me." And he'll be like, "Yes, Clark, get off your high horse. It's all of us." And that's very true. They are vigilantes who would be hunted by the law. Would the law use them if they had an agenda? Yes, but realistically, Batman he'd be hunted by everybody. He would have to be so good to outsmart the law. Commissioner Gordon, he'd probably be prosecuted and hung. This would not really pan out in reality. But again, there's no real resolution with Batman's drama because his psychosis is so deep that he's evolved into being Batman full time. Bruce Wayne is his alter ego. The Batman is his reality. That's who he wants to be, and that's his arrogance, his ego, everything that Bruce Wayne is. He's funneled into these toys, these gadgets to fight crime. Now, Batman is one of my favorite characters. One of the characters he was based on was Sherlock Holmes, so there's a connection there for me. But if you think about what's done in most of the movies, and even a lot of the comic books, we see him training with ninjas, we see him becoming an expert fighter, and being that smart would enable him to be a better fighter. But where in his origin, where in all of these stories have we seen him training his mind? When have we seen him with brilliant minds and psychologists and criminologists and learning all this? Did he just pick up some books and have an aptitude for it? There's a piece missing. And that piece is a different side of Batman. It's not just the Dark Knight. There's a brain. And the brain is what allows him to get the better of people like Superman, but they don't show that. Superman fans look at Batman and see the epitome of arrogance because there's like no way he could break this guy in half. But you have to understand the psychology between it. Superman as the Boy Scout is not going to break him in half, and Batman takes advantage of that. There was a line in one of the comic books, I think it was by Jeff Loeb, that had Batman saying, "Clark is basically a nice guy, and I'm not." So this is the crux between the two. It's brain versus brawn. But the brain seems to always be lacking on Batman's side. We know it's there, and we take it for granted, but do we see where it came from? Do we always see it in action in a way that's really outsmarting the criminals? Or do we see him inventing gadgets and coming up with things that he's using his money and his technology above his brain? I don't think that's the character of Batman, at least not the character that they've established. Again, there's pieces missing. And we don't necessarily need a resolution with Batman because it is a crutch that he's standing on. He takes that thing that happened to his parents and he has built his whole universe around it. So he can't really overcome it, or he stops being who he is. But as far as his inner demons and all that stuff that haunts him with his parents, there is no resolution. They say a writer should never write a character who's more intelligent than they are. And this is going to sound really insulting, but maybe we just haven't had the right writer writing Batman for a long time. We are focusing on one part of his character and overlooking something else. And this is why, so far up to this point, we keep changing the Batman in the movies. We keep changing the actor. We keep coming at the character from a different point of view, but isn't necessarily the psychological point of view that that character would realistically have. So if you think about Batman, I mean, he has so much angst and so many psychotic problems. I mean, he's also the sociopath who has to have it his way. But he has mommy issues, he has daddy issues, he has trust issues. He doesn't play well with others, and that's why he never really has a relationship or anyone around him aside from Alfred. Okay, there's Robin, and there's Batgirl in kind of a third wheel kind of attitude, but with Robin, does he really have a partnership? I mean, one dies, he goes out and finds another teenage boy, which is a little obscure to begin with, but it's almost like he's very unhappy with himself. He doesn't trust himself or anybody else in terms of a relationship. So he goes out at the same time and he's trying to get this Robin and make a new little version of himself, maybe a better version of himself, or maybe he just needs somebody to share the misery. He never actually succeeds, and those Robins never grow up to be the next Batman, they never grow up to be what he expects them to be, and then there's problems, and there's separation, and the psychosis of his relationship makes it crack. Robin is disposable. He's a buffer to Batman's loneliness. Let's look back at Dick Grayson for a moment. What was it like growing up under the wing, so to speak, of Batman? How did that life form him? And eventually we know there's problems and the break is there. But then he's on his own, and he's kind of a similar but kind of a very different character at the same time. He has relationships. It doesn't stop him from being an effective crime fighter. And how does that reflect back on Batman? Does it make him feel like he's wrong, or does it make him feel like, oh no, Robin is sloppy, he's doing foolish things, he'll never be the person that I trained him to be? I think that's the epitome of arrogance, because the fact that he keeps lining up these little Robin soldiers to take the next one's place and to be that buffer for loneliness, even though some of them die, some of them become insane because they can't really handle the type of lifestyle he's offering them, and they become villains in their own right. And then you have Batgirl. I mean, let's talk about this. It's Commissioner Gordon's daughter. She's following in the footsteps of her father's big hero. She ends up getting shot and paralyzed. You have all of these people that's getting hurt, getting killed. Batman continues to march on. Is there a moment somewhere in his life where the gravity of this begins to weigh? Things start to add up for the great detective. There's no change. There's just an ever-evolving cycle. That's part of the interest in the character, and it's also maybe part of the sadness, but definitely an arrogant bastard. And speaking of characters with inner demons that meet with no resolution, we have to take a good, honest look at Superman. Is the Man of Steel an arrogant bastard, or is he the big blue Boy Scout that everyone believes him to be? Well, we're going to find out, because there's some things that I think writers have been missing for decades in terms of that character. First of all, let's preface this characterization with the statement that there's no such thing as boring characters, but there's a lot of boring writers. Now here's an example in terms of Superman. Back when the character was created in the 40s and the 50s, they couldn't really make that much of a romantic interest out of Lois Lane. And then when we started getting a little bit closer to modern times, the big question growing up and in the movies, if you look back at the original Christopher Reeve's set of movies, there was the idea of how can he have sex with Lois Lane without pulping her? I remember that question going around the industry pretty blatantly. And this was the idea that we can never get these two together officially, because if they do, Superman has one little slip and Lois is dog food. In the Christopher Reeve movies, they solved this problem by taking away all of Superman's powers just so they could have sex. That was their solution. Then some brilliant comic book writer says, you know what, if Superman has been able to control himself all these years on such a level that he doesn't slip, we're sure that we can make him and Lois have sex. And they did. Now, this should have been obvious to a child. If he can pick up a water glass with the kind of strength he has and be able to control it where he's not crushing delicate things that he's touching every day in his life as Clark Kent, then yes, I think this guy has mastered control since he was a baby. So could he have sex with Lois Lane? Well, they conquered that and they decided the answer was yes. What they still haven't figured out in terms of this character, the relationship with Lois Lane, it's psychotic. If you take Lois Lane and put her in a position of reality, she goes out there every time. Superman can be fighting Doomsday or whatever. The entire planet, maybe the entire universe is at stake. She, for the sake of her story, will put herself in a situation where she is going to die every time. She has done this probably since the 1940s, and that character still hasn't grown. Then Superman has to make the decision, it's the world or Lois. And he always saves Lois. He goes back and saves the world too, but then she feels like, wow, he really cares, because when it came between me and the world, he chooses me every time. I have actually looked at characters that were in stories and in real life of women who put themselves in the shoes of a victim to get the attention of a man, and I've coined it the Lois Lane syndrome. And believe me, it exists, but Lois Lane has it. She may have been the ideal for this whole victimization from the beginning. If she had a friend at the Daily Planet or in her life, they would say, you know, Lois, this isn't about going after the story and risking everything for the story. You keep putting your life on the line for this guy every time. You need help. Realistically, Superman deals with this because in his arrogance, he's fine with that. This chick is putting her life on the line for him every time. Is he having a problem with that? Is he talking to her about that? Absolutely not. He goes out and saves her every time and feels perfectly fine and Boy Scoutish for doing it. So is he an arrogant bastard? You bet your ass he is. They can only show this in terms of when he goes up against Batman and Batman challenges him and he gets that little grumbly look like, you don't know who you're dealing with, buddy. I could snap you like a twig, but I won't because I'm a good guy. No, you can see it all the time. He feels something. In the Dark Knight stories by Frank Miller, this is probably played up the best, where that Boy Scout attitude is taken to such a degree that even when the government is taken over by Lex Luthor and Brainiac, and they have this totally puppet president of the United States saying, Superman, go do this. Superman, go do that. Even if he knows it's wrong, it's like, yes, sir, I'm on that. Batman and the other heroes are saying, hey, when is it right to say no? Our world is in jeopardy and you're out there working for the wrong side. Sorry, I'm a Boy Scout. I'm the most important person on the planet. I'm controlling everything. I'm being controlled. But you still can't go against me because I stand here firm in my arrogance. The ultimate modern story, if you have to give characters realistic problems from the stage that they've been on, then this classifies Superman and Lois Lane. And if there's a story in the future where Lois is in therapy because she has to stay away from Superman without risking her life, and Superman is over here brooding over it saying, oh my God, I've ruined this woman that I love. Then you would have a real inner demon's dilemma between Superman and Lois Lane. DC Comics will probably do that once I'm putting it out there and say, oh, we've been working on that for the past 12 months. Make it 18 months to sound good. But these videos are time-stamped and you've heard it here first because, to me, what else can you do with these characters? And I'm probably pissing off a lot of Superman fans, but you know that I know that you know that I know that I'm right. And I've been right for decades. Arrogant bastard, yay! He just can't admit it to himself, and that's worse. So, joking aside, how do you feel about heroes who are arrogant bastards? I think if you're going to take one lesson from this in your writing, in your characterization, it's back to the old saying that your hero has to have flaws. They have to have problems. There's something about them that's not a perfect or even a nice person. And these characters establish that. Some of them have been around from the 40s and 50s. Sherlock Holmes has been around from the Victorian era. And yet, their flaws have kept them guessing as to the type of personality, the past, fill in the holes that the writers left out. And part of that is the mystique that's been attracting audiences to these characters generation after generation after generation. If you can instill as much psychosis into your hero, even if it's not a perfectly established psychosis, I mean, we're drilling holes into things and part of it's fun, but also the mystery of it is what draws us into these characters. It's what keeps them going. It's what keeps our interest. And I think that is the important part of this video if you take anything else away from it. Flaws are interesting. Flaws are important. flaws make your character seem